So what flags should you be looking out for? What am I talking about? Well, in his latest book, Flag Watching, How a Fox Decodes the Future, Clem Sunter explains exactly how he does it, giving away the tricks of the trade. He talks about the flags, how it will face us in life, business, and even the ones facing economic prospects of the country and indeed the world. He says flags can be calibrated in terms of duration, geographical footprint, the impact and probability of different outcomes. He's been waving flags for years and with devastating accuracy. One of his early books forecast the 9/11 attacks. He was also seminal in pointing out issues in the global economy ahead of 2008. The scenario planner, Clem Sunter, to look at flags for South African business and also, of course, flags affecting you in your everyday life in one of the most exciting countries on the planet. Because it is exciting, is it not, Clem Sunter?
Yeah, no, it is very, very exciting, and there are plenty of green as well as red flags.
Now, okay, explain the flags. So people who will go to conferences and see you speak, they will see you interview, and you talk about the flags. You're not talking about semaphore, which is a language of flags all of its own, but you've created a system of flags which allows you to either point towards danger or towards optimism. Yeah,
it really came out of the scenario planning work, Bruce, because
this is way back to Anglo-American days.
Way back to, yes, the 1986. We did the high road, low road scenarios, and actually it did contribute to the conversation at the time, and it went down very well. But for businesses, they said, we don't want hypothetical futures. We want to know what's changing our business right now. And so over time, and I've done this with Chantal Ilbury, with whom we wrote The Mind of a Fox. We've started looking at the flags which are currently changing business. The clockwork flags, which are ticking away as trends, and the cloudy flags, which may be events or changes in technology you don't understand, which could lead to real transformation of a business. And so we asked business, what are the top 10 flags that are changing your game? Not just in the world or South Africa, but right here in your industry. And then we look at scenarios for their business.
How do you distill, though, the risks when it comes to business? Because there are so many moving parts. There are geographical issues in terms of where you're located. If you're a business based in Lagos or in Cape Town or Johannesburg, you're going to have different flags based on municipal infrastructure, based on access to markets, based on populations and influx of people. You've got national flags, you've got continental flags, commodity flags, export partner flags. I mean, this is a sea of flags. It's like the United Nations of flags.
Yeah, and the whole point of a strategic conversation is to try and distill a lot of flags down to what you consider are the primary ones, because you cannot watch too many flags 24/7. So we kind of say, rather like scenarios, you can't really do more than 4 scenarios in a matrix. And of course we use 2 for South Africa. And once you're over 4, scenario planning becomes ineffective. Same with flag watching. You've got to say, okay, we've had this conversation, we've got all these flags from the global economy, from Africa, from South Africa, from our own industry. Which are the ones that we, as the executive, feel could really change the game? And one of my points is this, Bruce, is the bigger the company and the more money they have invested in a particular game, the more blind they are to the flags that are actually changing the game.
And that was going to be my question, because very often executive teams, because they start this group think and people start thinking like each other after a period of time, they become quite myopic. They may not even see the risks that face them.
Well, exactly. And that's why I say it's an essential part of risk management, because a lot of people think risk management is internal audit, where you look at the integrity of your internal processes to see whether you can have a rogue trader or whether somebody's stealing money from the company and all that. Yes, you've got to do that. But you've got to look at the external risks to the business, and that is what flag watching is all about.
You can be the best company in the world at doing whatever it is that you do. You make the nicest widget in the world. But if you're operating in a dysfunctional environment, well, your business can't possibly survive.
Yeah, and you've got to spot when the game is declining. And that's why I always, on the sort of green flag side, produce NASPAS, because they spotted the fact that printed media would be under threat. And they bought an internet company. They went,
They bought a lot of internet companies.
Exactly.
One happened to work.
I know, one happened to work. But the point is this,
Yes.
is that a lot of their competitors went on battling in a game which, if you had actually sort of done a little bit of prediction on the internet flag, you could have said is going to be a tougher, declining game, because people are going to watch the news on the internet or on channel TV or whatever, and they're not actually going to get a newspaper to pick up the breaking news. They're going to get a newspaper for commentary, like The Economist.
Yeah, exactly right. Then you look at other companies that should have looked at the flags and didn't do it adequately. Old Mutual went off and spent 100 billion rand on global expansion and is gradually collapsing that back inward. Standard Bank expanded quite dramatically into other emerging markets, bought a nice business in Russia, bought a nice business in Argentina. But oops, 2008 happened, and Old Mutual nearly went bust, and Standard Bank came back home to the African continent. They weren't watching the flags closely enough.
Well, you see, that's why the global, one of the global flags, and it has been a very good flag in terms of choosing where you invest, is the demographic flag. Because a lot of people, politicians, business people, have said Europe is going to recover as long as you throw lots of money at very low interest rates. It's going to recover. My point is, if you actually look at the causation that arises out of the aging of the European population, they are actually going to sit in a kind of zone of 0 to 1% growth, with obviously some countries occasionally doing more, but it's a totally different arena. And I'm afraid to say Japan is...
Well, I was about to suggest that maybe Europe looks, in the next 20 years, looks like Japan has looked in the last 20.
Yes.
And Japan looks like a bad version of Japan for the next 20.
And what that flag would suggest, that the one place where you can invest, either in equities or in a business, is America, because it's got a younger population. So there are some very big strategic consequences of the flags.
What are the flags? I mean, if you want a demographic story, but you need a growth story with it as well, you look at the African continent. It's got wonderful demographics, the consultants will tell you, for a great growth future. But you can only create that growth if there's something else happening underneath, which goes to your point of the creation of small businesses.
Yeah, and the point about to Africa is that it's not, Africa as one continent. It has countries with different prospects. So, yes, you firstly say sub-Saharan Africa has the youngest population in the world. But
which is a risk and an opportunity.
Yeah, and because one of our other flags is the environmental risk. And of course, there is, unfortunately, quite a lot of environmental destruction going on in Africa, but that's different to climate change, which is caused mainly by America and China. So, but on the sort of straight front of increasing markets, Africa is one of the best places to be, because it's got this incredible addition to population every year, and they're wanting stuff.
Yeah, they do.
And as one cosmetics company said to me, they've made Africa their #1 target market for skincare, hair care products, because Europe simply doesn't offer that growth in market anymore.
No, look, we're in a fascinating space right now. What are the flags telling you about the scenarios for South Africa over, I don't know, can you give us is there a 1-year time frame? Is there a 5-year time frame? What are the flags?
Well,
so they're not crystal balls, I understand this.
No, they're not. But certainly quality of infrastructure, which we've got, which we've either got to get right, and that's electricity, but it also applies to education and health. Quality of infrastructure is something you've got to watch to decide whether, in fact, the flags are turning green, because more accountability is going into
Public-private partnerships in there is a very positive green flag.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So that's really important. As I said, the entrepreneurial flag is absolutely critical in South Africa, because the nature of work has changed. That's a flag. Yeah. In the 60s and 70s, people joined huge enterprises with hundreds of thousands of people. That is no longer the case in this century. So if you want to grow employment in this country, you've got to look at the Uber model or the Airbnb model, where you have a network where individual people can offer their service. I mean, in terms of cars and houses, laundry services, whatever it is. And you've got to, therefore, go back to being entrepreneurial. that is the only way our economy is going to grow, given the changing nature of work. And then the one other one, which is quite green, Bruce, is pockets of excellence. This country has incredible pockets of excellence. And whenever you get down on yourself, you just got to think of your daily life and your daily shopping experience. And, there aren't many countries, if any, in the world that you can actually get those pockets of excellence supplying you with services and goods.
You've got to be prepared to pay for them. You just got to be prepared to pay for them. Now, listen, I've got to finish off because in your book you talk about how you started in the scenario planning business, which I found absolutely fascinating. You were working at Anglo-American. You were inspired by, I think, a French scenario planner who came to you, and the chairman of Anglo-American said to you, "Do that, Clem." And off you went to go and do that. And I suppose it was pretty touch and go, and you took your scenarios to F.W. de Klerk and his cabinet toward the end of the 1980s.
1986.
There we go.
November 86.
And you've got your business of scenario planning to thank on Pick Buerta, of all people.
Yeah, I know, because, I think quite a few members at that meeting with the cabinet were a little cynical about our intent and everything else. But Pick picked up immediately and said, this guy is talking sense, and I think he should have a wider audience in terms of our parliamentarians and other constituencies and inside government departments. And he opened the door.
It's funny how things work out, isn't it? Because those scenarios, and you again would have pointed to high road and low road scenarios, there's a political future which involves bloodshed or negotiation.
Yes, it was as simple as that. And of course, it showed the power of scenario planning, which was that you could never have forecast in the mid-80s that Nelson Mandela would be released and that we would negotiate a new constitution. But you could write it as a possible future. So it wasn't a prediction, it was a possible future.
But it was about choice. And it's about making particular choices at particular times which define destinies.
And all that we've done with the flags is, before you get to the scenarios, look at the kind of current things which are changing the game. And in the mid-80s, there's no doubt the sanctions were changing the game. There were quite a few other things changing the game happening behind the scenes.
And the world was changing beyond South Africa in a way that, had it not been changing, de Klerk might have not had the courage of his convictions to release Mandela in 1990.
You're so right, and I mentioned it in the book, that if Gorbachev hadn't been around, giving a probable scenario that the Soviet Union might not continue to exist, which obviously it didn't in the end, but that probability rose in the late 80s as a real flag, and that allowed us to start opening the doors to our own democracy.
Yeah. It's all about choice, and it's all about this uncanny symbiosis. Who would have thought that Ronald Reagan, Maggie Thatcher and Mikhail Gorbachev were instrumental in the release of Nelson Mandela? And that gave us the country we have today. Scenario planner, author of Flag Watching, How a Fox Decodes the Future, Clem Sunter. Read the book, it's fabulous. More great stories like the one how Pick Buerta saved his bacon. There'll be more flags to discuss and analyse on a constantly changing global world. For now, though, have yourself a very good evening. Bye-bye.